Welcome to the Unfettered Speech Podcast. I'm Patrick Sullivan, and we have two special guests today. I want to introduce the first one, which is my colleague, Slajana Vukovic.
Hello, Patrick. I'm so happy to be here today.
It's great to see you,
And
Slajana. Yeah.
okay, and I'm an attorney and I'm a fellow board member with Patrick on Integrity Media, and I'm super excited to welcome our guest today, Jane Velez-Mitchell. Jane is a veteran journalist, a veteran media person. She has been doing media for over 30 years. She has been on CNN's as a newscaster, and had her own show back in 2000 era, and since then she has founded her own platform, Unchained TV, which is a media platform for animal rights issues, discussing animal rights, animal liberation, veganism, on a streaming platform called Unchained TV that Jane founded, and I am so honored to have her here with us today. Jane, welcome
Welcome,
to
Jane.
Thank you
Unfettered
so
Speech.
much. Honored to be here. I'm
Jane,
all
let's.
about integrity in media, so this is my place.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. And Unfettered Speech and Unchained TV have a similar theme in that you formed Unchained TV because of your, I'm assuming because of your experience in mainstream legacy media. Can you tell us why you have the platform Unchained TV?
Well, we like to joke if you want to get fair mainstream media coverage of an animal rights issue, you have to either get naked or get arrested. And then it's not even fair, they just cover you. So it shouldn't have to be that way. People shouldn't have to risk going to prison to talk about beagles, for example, trapped in laboratories, spinning endlessly in tiny cages. And that's a story that's been in the news, the Ridgeland Beagle breeding facility. And why is it that it got mainstream coverage? Because up to 1,000 people risk going to prison, and 4 of them are still charged with felonies that could land them in prison for decades for going in there and trying to rescue beagles after years of very mainstream efforts to get law enforcement and the powers that be to look into what was going on inside that facility. There was a court proceeding where a whistleblower testified that non-veterinarians were doing painful surgeries without anesthesia on beagles. And still, there was no real government response. There were negotiations. So that's why those folks decided, well, we've asked the government many times to do something to get these beagles out of the situation. We're going to go in there, and they call it open rescue. They don't go in through subterfuge. They actually videotape what they're doing and show it to the world as they're doing it. That's called open rescue. And they wait around to get arrested. They do not flee. They do not hide evidence. So it's an upside down world. I covered crime for years. Usually the suspects try to flee. They try to hide the evidence. In this upside down world of people risking prison to show what is happening to animals behind closed doors, they videotape themselves and they wait to be arrested. Also, they can have their day in court so the animals can have their day in court. They shouldn't have to go to those lengths to get justice for animals. That's what we're all about.
Well, Jane, I want to ask you a little bit about your journey, but before we get there, you just brought up a really interesting point, which is, you've got this group of people in Ridgeland who were working for change, and they got the change, at least in that small instance, they got the change they were looking for. And as we all know, there's so much frustration on whatever political issue you want to talk about. There are so many issues in our country that are 80% issues. And you see it in Europe too. There are issues that everybody seems to be for, but they can't get. And of course, there was this famous Princeton study, I think it was in 2014, that said basically the 1%, the donors, they get everything they want. Ordinary people get nothing that they want. And that's the system that we have. So people, a lot of people are waking up to this and going, wait a minute. I voted this way, nothing happened. I voted that way, nothing happened. We still have wars, we still have censorship, we still have all the things that a lot of we don't have health care for people in this country. How can I get it? I'm voting, I'm trying to vote my way to a better future, and it doesn't work. So what do I do now? And what would you say to those people? Because you're obviously on the cutting edge of a movement that's getting some results, and it's working. So what's working, and what would your advice to be to people who are frustrated by the political process right now?
Well, it was in the early 80s when I first saw a video of head injury experiments being done on primates. And I was working in Philadelphia as a local news reporter, and it was a Philadelphia university, and it was horrific. And at that moment, it was right around the time that PETA was getting started. I said, this is awful. I don't know what to do about it, but something has to be done. So there's been decades of failure, failure, failure as the complex, I would call it the experimental complex, industrial complex, continued to grow. And now we're starting to see cracks in the armor. First of all, because AI, quantum computing, organs on a chip, organoids, all of these technological advances are showing blatantly more effectiveness than torturing animals, which has been done since before Christ. They were breaking dogs' spinal cords to see what would happen. They're still doing it. And so here we are in the 21st century, and finally the breakthrough is people are realizing this is medieval. It doesn't need to happen, and it's not as effective as what's happening in labs. So there's technological advancement. Also, bipartisanship. Animal rights is one of the rare issues where Republicans, Democrats, conservatives, liberals, libertarians, old, young, people of all racial and ethnic backgrounds and demographics agree. They love animals. Most Americans consider themselves animal lovers. They love their dogs. They love their cats. They love their horses. At Unchained TV, we're trying to expand that circle of compassion beyond those animals to all animals, because most of the animals being killed are being killed for food. 80 plus billion animals in industrialized animal agriculture being raised in what I feel is very fair to describe as industrialized torture and killed. And we're told as a society that suffering doesn't count. And to me, the essence of all evil is when people get together and say, that suffering doesn't count. Whether it's women trying to have the right to vote, gays, and I'm an out gay member of the gay community, whether it's the enslavement of people, other humans. In society, there has always been a time where people get together and they say, you know what, we got to pass on that suffering. That suffering doesn't count, but it does count. And that's what we at Unchained TV try to bring the public, because the mainstream media, when they cover something, they cover it only from an economic standpoint 99% of the time. For example, right now, rising beef prices due to inflation, tariffs, the oil issues resulting from the Iran war, et cetera, et cetera. So even liberal news organizations like MS Now, they're constantly talking about the rising beef prices and treating the beef producers as pure victims, never talking about the fact that animal agriculture is a leading cause of climate change, habitat destruction, wildlife extinction, human world hunger, and preventable lifestyle diseases like heart disease and cancer. In their reporting, they never mention that processed meat is officially carcinogenic. People do, and mainstream, a big media organization just did a whole thing on hot dogs, never mentioning that processed meat is officially carcinogenic and never including a plant-based veggie dog. So we have this ingrained prejudice where animals are commodified, they're treated as commodities, and the people covering them never talk about the suffering. With screwworm, screwworm is incredibly painful to cows, and yet there's story after story after story never discussing the suffering that the animals experience. That's just bad journalism, in my opinion.
But getting back to, well, let's start with you. You started in the 1980s in that answer, and you said PETA. And so have there been victories on the animal rights front, in your opinion, since PETA started in the 80s? And how did they do it? Because I think there's a lot of other political activists of all stripes that would like to know how you get change these days.
Well, yeah, it's a great question. Right now we're editing a history of the vegan movement in the United States. And you know that Benjamin Franklin, our founding father, said meat is murder. You look it up. I know, shocking, right? Because PETA said meat is murder. But long before PETA said meat is murder, Benjamin Franklin, who experimented with vegetarianism throughout his youth, something that's never covered in the documentaries that they do about him, said meat is murder. So it's unprovoked murder. So when we look at the history, we have to take a big step back and look at the context, right? If we just look at a small sliver of time, we might think we're not getting anywhere. But when you take into account that the word vegan didn't even exist till 1944 and wasn't even in a dictionary till the 1960s, you realize that we've made a tremendous amount of progress. I think you probably remember the days when people called it vegan and vegan sounded vaguely pornographic. But no, now everybody knows the word vegan. There's vegan options in most restaurants. So we are making progress. And that's one of the reasons the meat industry has declared war on veganism. Really what happened is when Beyond Meat became the most successful initial public offering in years in 2019, and the very name Beyond Meat told a story, the meat industry, which is very tied to the pharmaceutical industry, big meat, big pharma, people wouldn't need a lot of the drugs that they're making billions of dollars on if people adopted a whole food plant-based diet. There's zero cholesterol in any plant-based product. Go up and down the supermarket aisles and test me, because plants don't produce cholesterol, animals produce cholesterol. So cholesterol, very connected to plaque, connected to heart disease, America's leading killer, just for example. So when you look at the fact that we are trying to get the word out, not for our own benefit. I don't get a commission when people go vegan. I mean, I don't take a salary. This is a labor of love, because I see that we have to transition to a nonviolent plant-based society if we are to survive as a species. I just did a documentary on this called The Climate Healers that's on Unchained TV, which you can see right behind me. This is our streaming network, and it's also available on any telephone. You can just go to your app store and just download for free Unchained TV, 2,000 videos. But one of those videos is called The Climate Healers, and we interview a famed systems analyst who was instrumental in accelerating internet speeds. And he said, look, we are breaking boundaries left and right, and we are barreling toward a climate apocalypse. And there's one thing that can turn it around, and that is for us to transition to a plant-based society. And he makes a lot of arguments. I am not a scientist myself. I don't pretend to be, but he makes a very good case that essentially, if you boil it down, we've given planet Earth a buzz cut in order to have animal agriculture. 37% approximately of all ice-free land is used in some way, shape, or form to either graze cattle or to grow the commodity crops to feed 80 to 90 billion animals. Land animals alone we're killing every year. And those trees that were eliminated to create that grazing land and that factory farmland, they are not absorbing carbon. Trees absorb carbon. If we got rid of animal agriculture, reforested that land, those trees would immediately begin to absorb carbon and bring the temperatures back to where they were in pre-industrial times. That is a way to solve climate change. And Oxford University itself said in a report, a study published in the New York Times, that meat eaters can reduce their greenhouse gas emissions footprint by up to 75% by switching to a plant-based diet. Right there, that's the solution to climate change. And you don't even have to be a climate change denier to get the importance, that how crucial that is. We are seeing the results of climate change before our very eyes. Right here in Los Angeles, we had the Palisades, Altadena fires that wiped out hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of homes. I asked that scientist, what would this climate apocalypse you're so worried about look like? And he said, well, you know that Pacific Palisades Altadena fire? What if there were thousands of them happening simultaneously around the United States? That's what climate change apocalypse will look like.
Jane, thank you so much for that breakdown of your important message to all of us. But I wanted to ask you, you have said that in the media, that the media is one of the biggest problems for for animal rights and veganism, for the message, because we're constantly being inundated with commercials and pharmaceuticals, commercials for fast food and processed food and meat and dairy and pharmaceuticals. Like that is what the public is, that's what's normalized, and how media is the biggest problem. Here at Integrity Media and the Unfettered Speech podcast, we support a lot of independent journalism, a lot of indie media, a lot of Substack and those types of outlets. What is your take on those outlets? As far as the issue of animal liberation and animal rights goes, and veganism? As far as is it across both genres, both legacy media and independent media, or is it something that's strictly a mainstream media issue?
Well, a good question. I think independent media is our saving grace. I love The Guardian. I love Vox. I love Sentient Media, The Intercept. There are a lot of independent news organizations doing really good journalism. But as far as legacy advertiser-based media, you don't have to have somebody knock on your door and say, don't cover this. All you have to do is look at the advertisers on your network, and you get the idea pretty quickly that talking about the impact of animal agriculture on climate change when you're running burger commercials and cholesterol-lowering drug commercials, it's not going to fly. So people do the math, and advertisers keep the lights on, and they're not going to offend their advertisers. That's the bottom line. That's why having independent media is so crucial. And I love what Integrity Media is doing. We need to celebrate these independent journalists who do really good journalism. Indeed, these independent journalists are the only ones really covering the undercover investigations being done by animal rights groups like Direct Action Everywhere, which just created a factory farm map of California, which is the fourth largest economy in the world. And they showed, even though everybody thinks they're eating humane meat, they are going with drones and using Google Maps to really showcase the horrors of factory farming, industrialized animal agriculture. And Vox covered this. I give a shout out to a journalist like Marina Bolotnikova with Vox, and she does incredible work. And that's really good journalism, and it should be being done by these big media organizations. But they're looking the other way.
Jane, you worked in corporate media for quite a while. And I
Yes.
wonder, you said you look at the advertisers and you say, okay, right, I'm not going to go there. I was just curious because I've seen these montages of all these newscasters saying the exact same words. I'm sure you've seen those, right? And some of it's because they're owned by the same corporation, and so there literally is a memo from above saying,
Yeah.
here's what the editorial is going to look like. I get that, but when everybody says the same words and the same, it really feels to an outside viewer like there literally is a memo, like during the pandemic, safe and effective. Whether you believe the vaccine was safe and effective or not, just the fact that everybody said it exactly, they didn't say effective and safe sometimes, they said safe and effective in that order, that way. And they said it across all these platforms. So when you're in a corporate environment like that and you're a journalist, how do you get those messages? Is it overt or is it covert that you just figure it out by reading the room that you're in, that, hey, this is the way you say things and this is the way you do things? How does it work when you're there?
Well, it was 28 years ago that I went vegan. I had been vegetarian, but I went vegan when Howard Lyman, a fourth generation cattle rancher turned vegan activist, the guy who went on Oprah. Remember, he went on Oprah and he revealed the secrets, and she said, that just stopped me cold from eating another burger, and the cattleman sued her, and it was a big issue. Well, he launched into a media campaign. I interviewed him when I was working at KCAL, local TV station in Los Angeles, located in Paramount Studios. And I walked out of that interview a vegan. And all of a sudden, I started seeing the world through a new set of glasses. And when they'd asked me to do the rodeo story, the rodeo kicker, and I had then learned that these animals are they're not kicking because they enjoy kicking. They're kicking because they're in pain. They're kicking because of electric prods. And I said, I'm not going to read that as a kicker story. And so I started making trouble. I started to become a big pain in the tuchus. But I did it whenever I could. Then I worked at Celebrity Justice, which was the precursor to TMZ. And that's when I realized celebrities hated us. Obviously, we were a tabloid show. I said, I'm going to work with PETA because PETA knows a lot of celebrities. And these celebrities would literally push their publicists aside to talk to me about an issue involving animals that they were passionate about. I even interviewed Robert Redford, and his publicists were just like, they were fit to be tied, but he cared about the military sonar impacting the whales. And he literally almost pushed his publicist aside to talk to me. And we had a one-on-one with this amazing guy, Robert Redford. What a wonderful man, who spoke to me because he cared more about the whales than about, oh, this is a tabloid show and I shouldn't be on it. And so when I got hired by CNN Headline News to have a nightly show, I asked very politely, I said, would you mind if I did an animal segment once a week? And the other end of the line, I heard a pause, and then they said, no, we think that's okay. Well, I started doing hardcore animal rights activism every Friday night, and God bless them, for 6 years, they allowed me to do that. Seen by millions of people. It wasn't just nationally, that was a global show. And we interviewed Captain Paul Watson and Ingrid Newkirk and Gene Bauer of Farm Sanctuary and all the leaders in the animal rights movement, and brought a lot of the issues to the forefront. And we won some Genesis Awards from the Humane Society for that. So you have to take your opportunities where you get them, and by hook or by crook, get those stories out there. And so I'll always be grateful to my bosses at CNN Headline News for allowing me to do that. Once I started, I guess there was no way to stop it, right? And I think it was really good for the movement. And so when my show ended, we had a good run, 6 years. I was at that age where I realized, okay, I've been doing this for 37 years. It's probably the end of the road. Why don't I actually, I went to an executive there at CNN. I said, what do you think I should do? She said, well, Jane, you obviously care a lot about animals. You should do that full time. So I took what she said to heart, and I just started taking that little Friday animal segment and making it an entire thing. And next thing you know, we had a nonprofit, 501c3 nonprofit called UnchainedTV. We just won 19 Telly Awards for our original programming, award-winning cooking series, vegan cooking series, New Day, New Chef, award-winning vegan travel series, Kale Crew, award-winning reality TV series, Green Goddesses Take New York. And we've done a lot of very creative stuff like Pig Little Lies, the world's first reality TV series starring pigs. We have a lot of fun, and we've got more than 2,000 videos that are life-changing. I mean, I've had people say to me, Unchained TV changed my life. I saw a video on Unchained TV, and I stopped eating animals because I realized that my actions were not in line with my values of compassion, nonviolence. And that is really what is going to flip the script in this war-torn world. Very famous people have said, as long as as we're killing animals, we will continue to have wars. I think it was Leo Tolstoy or somebody like that. But, practicing peace on our plate 3 times a day to solve climate change, to solve habitat destruction, wildlife extinction, human world hunger. Think about it. We're 8.3 billion humans feeding 80 to 90 billion land animals every year. The overwhelming majority of soy produced goes into farmed animals. Meanwhile, literally millions of people are suffering from malnutrition and starvation. We do not have a food system optimized for feeding the world. As Dr. Silas Rao, the genius that we just profiled in The Climate Healer, said, we could easily feed everybody on this planet. We could feed them a healthy, whole food, plant-based diet. Unfortunately, our food system is optimized to give the richest people the most exotic food at any time, not to feed everybody. If we wanted to feed everybody, we could transition our system, and we could even make food a right, just like air and water and have a baseline of whole food, plant-based food free for everyone. Sounds crazy, but it is doable. And it's doable on less land than we're currently using for today's very destructive food system, where we're allowing everybody, encouraging everybody to eat like kings. What did kings get? Gout, right? People weren't designed throughout the course of human history. People didn't eat meat for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. It was a garnish. It was something that was more of a celebratory, special occasion item. And we've, through fast food, we've created this really insane world where people feel entitled to eat meat for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And then we wonder why people are getting heart disease, why there's early onset dementia. We have a great documentary on Unchained TV called How Not to Die, filled with doctors, Dr. Michael Greger, Dr. Neil Barnard, all sorts of doctors who say, look, the incredible rise of early onset dementia is connected to our diet, because when arteries and vessels in the system, the body, get clogged, it's systemic. It's not just the artery to the heart getting clogged with plaque. It's arteries everywhere, vessels everywhere. That's why, not to be X-rated, erectile dysfunction is a precursor of heart disease. And we're seeing early onset dementia skyrocketing. And there's a good argument to be made that it is in large part due to our extraordinarily unhealthy diet. Now, I'm not a doctor, don't pretend to be, but watch How Not to Die, based on the New York Times best-selling book of the same title. It's on Unchained TV. I tell people, so many people I know, their parents are suffering dementia at earlier and earlier ages, and it's ruining their lives. And I say, watch this film.
It's a great title.
Yeah.
I love the title, How Not to Die.
Yeah.
It's got to be a bestseller. Everybody wants to know that. But getting back to CNN, so they actually gave you the leeway to do what you wanted to do. I'm surprised to hear that answer, frankly, because I thought I would hear that, oh no, they want to keep you on the rails and not let you explore your own interests. So getting back to that, like, why is it then, if you had that kind of freedom at CNN Headline News to introduce this issue that's obviously very important to you, and CNN let you do that, why are we hearing the same thing all the time on that corporate news instead of
That
people
was a
saying,
fluke. That
a
was a
fluke?
fluke.
Okay.
Okay, that was a fluke. And I'm very grateful for it, but I'll give you an example. A very famous reporter went to the Vegan Women's Summit in Brooklyn a couple of years ago with 2 camera crews, and she videotaped everything. Never got on the air. I never saw it. Can't find it anywhere. So a couple of weeks later, I saw the same very famous reporter talking about climate change. Is there anything we can do? Can we do anything? Well, we just spent all day explaining to her the connection between animal agriculture and climate change. That never came up. So it is a mainstream media blackout. And it's not just the media, it's the United Nations. There is a report called Livestock's Long Shadow that anybody can find on the internet that documented many years ago animal agriculture's impact on the climate, and stated flat out, animal agriculture is responsible for more greenhouse gas emissions than all transportation combined. And then there were scientists who said it's even worse than that. And ever since then, they've been dialing that back. And it's follow the money. Follow the money. That's really all at the heart of it. That's what it is.
Yeah, I want to push back a little bit on your take on independent media. I feel that other than a journalist like Glenn Greenwald, who is a vegan himself, and Democracy Now!, and yes, Vox recently, and there's been more animal rights stories recently because of the Beagles, because they're so darn cute, and everybody loves dogs in America, so that story has spread like wildfire. But that is a recent development. And even in independent media, because people are not vegan, they, just like coffee drinkers don't want to hear about bad stuff about coffee and how toxic it is, and how the story about coffee being bad never gets told. And same with animal rights and animal liberation and veganism. These independent outlets very rarely discuss the issues. They never they hardly ever see show undercover footage of what happens to the animals in the slaughterhouses, or the health issue as far as like the relatedness with eating animals and heart disease, inflammation, cancer, diabetes, early childhood diabetes, all of the onset, and how things are just getting worse and worse. That isn't being talked about, and it's almost like it's a type of censorship by omission. What's your
Yes.
take?
It's a crime of omission. I always say I was a crime reporter for many years. Now I'm covering the crime of the century because it's not like we have all the time in the world. And it's not me saying this. Sir David Attenborough said there's something like 9 boundaries. And when we break those boundaries, there's no turning back. And you read these individual stories like the whales washing up the Pacific Northwest due to diminishing food supply because of climate change and the ice caps melting. And that's just one little example. So even when media does cover these little examples of things going wrong, they're not connecting the dots. They're not saying, oh my gosh, what is causing this? Fossil fuels is sort of the knee-jerk response. But you ask most of the people on the street, define fossil fuels for me. They probably couldn't even define it. It doesn't threaten the incumbent industries because they realize not everybody can go out there and buy a Tesla or an electric car. And it's more of a theoretical, but they're very threatened by meat because it's something that's very obvious. It's on your plate. You make this choice 3 times a day. And it is kind of the basis for our current economic system. And so there's a reason why they have a bull at Wall Street, right? And so it's extremely threatening because they realize if people wised up and realize that they don't need to kill animals to survive and thrive and have delicious food, oh my gosh, would that upset the apple cart, right? So it's a very entrenched industry, just like the animal experimentation industry. Now the animal experimentation industry is being shattered because you have this bipartisan interest. Honestly, I was listening to Congressman Langworthy, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, a New York congressman talking about the biggest Beagle breeding facility in upstate New York, and he sounded like a radical animal rights activist. I was like, oh my God, this thing has gone mainstream. So there's an old saying, first they ignore you, then they make fun of you, then they get angry at you, and then they join you. And when it comes to veganism, they're definitely in the let me get angry at you phase. People are very angry because the media has waged this very cynical war describing veggie burgers as ultra processed. Now, it's not like meat is not ultra processed. In fact, processed meat, hot dogs, it's ultra processed, okay? But they don't target hot dogs. They extol the virtues of hot dogs, even though they're cancer causing, while attacking a bunch of peas and soy put up together into a patty and calling that ultra processed. And why are they doing that? Because burgers are sort of the essential meat dish. And they realize that if people got wise to the fact that they could enjoy burgers without killing animals, it's a house of cards, it's going to collapse. Already dairy is collapsing because people have all these alternatives in the store, soy milk, almond milk, rice milk, oat milk, and they're choosing them, and it's becoming mainstream, it's becoming normalized. And people realize now, well, we don't have to drink the breast milk of a cow in order to enjoy our coffee or our tea or whatever. So that's one piece of the puzzle. But to me, the entire animal agriculture industry is a house of cards. And that's why they're so terrified. It's a sign of our success that they're fighting us like crazy, to the point where we created something called Veg Media Watch, which is run by an incredible activist named Donnie Moss, very smart guy. And he reviews all these hit pieces and calls them out on a variety of social media, including LinkedIn and X. And he names names, he names the reporters' names, he names the managing editors' names. He goes all the way up the mast and points out when they're doing bad journalism. To wit, we talked about MS Now constantly every night talking about the rising beef prices, never mentioning the downside of beef ever once, extolling it, talking about their stomachs growling. And that is a liberal news media organization.
So, Jane, let's talk about your organization. We were talking before we started about Unchained TV, and
Yes,
it's easy to know where to find you, right? It's unchained.tv, right?
there it is.
Yeah, there it is.
That was our award-winning show right there, one of the many.
So you left CNN headline news and you started Unchained TV. Can you talk about that experience? Because again, as Slajin has said, we support a lot of independent journalists. There's probably many more who would like to do what you're doing on some level, on doing it on your own and getting your message out there. Can you tell us the story of that? Like, how was that journey from from corporate news to Unchained TV? What was the biggest challenge and how did you overcome that?
Well, what happened was I was a reporter for 37 years and I never participated in protests because as a reporter, you really can't. You can get in trouble for going to protests. You're supposed to be objective and stay out of controversies. So I realized I could go to this protest against Ringling Brothers Circus in Brooklyn. I was living in New York at the time. And my girlfriend at the time said, "You're Unchained." And I said, "Yeah, Jane Unchained." That's what we called it at first. And then we changed it to Unchained TV. And so I went to this protest outside, I believe, the Barclays Center, 9 degrees. I had a little GoPro. This is late 2014, early 2015, before Facebook Live even came into the picture for the general public. And I had this little GoPro camera. My hand was shaking, but there were 200 activists there holding signs, and people were walking past them and giving them the finger and telling them to go home, get a job, and all that stuff. But they stood there with their signs, protesting the use of animals in the circus. Obviously, these animals are, brutalized and broken to tigers don't like to jump through hoops of flame, etc. And so I covered it. That was my first story. And I thought, am I wasting my time? I said, no, if these activists can stand there in the cold, then the least I can do is document it. And to wit, imagine now today, Ringling Brothers no longer exists as an animal circus. Now, that has nothing to do with me. PETA should get most of the credit for that. But it did seem impossible at that moment. It seemed almost like a waste of time. And we were ultimately successful. As Nelson Mandela says, it always seems impossible until it's done. That was his famous quote. And I have it on my refrigerator just to remind me. So after that, I started to go to protests and videotape. Then I moved back to LA. And I was having a vegan cookout, and I happened to have some glamorous people, some models and actors and actresses, and I thought, oh, Facebook is now letting us go live. Let me check it out and see if my camera even has a signal out there on the deck. And all of a sudden, I started seeing all these comments. Oh, what are they eating? Who's that? And I thought, wow, this is something. So I said, well, we make lunch every day. Let's just go live. So we created something called Lunch Break Live. For several years, we went live every single day, never missing a day, a holiday, a weekend. And sometimes when chefs didn't show up, I would cook myself and set the kitchen on fire practically. But it was very successful. It was like 2016, 2017. Those were really good years. 2018. One year, I can't remember which, we had 17 million views. So we were really, some of the top vegan chefs were coming over and we would go to their house. But then what happened was the algorithms changed. And so instead of getting 2,000 or 3,000, then it was like 700, then it went down to 300, and then we realized that's not really working anymore. So we stopped doing it. Although somebody told me, you really figured a very clever way to have top chefs come over and make you lunch every day. I said, yes, I was very clever. I had the best chefs cooking me these dishes. So then I had done a documentary called Countdown to Year Zero, and a friend of mine had gotten her documentary on Amazon Prime. So I called her and I said, how'd you do that? And she said, oh, I know this guy, Eamon. So I called Eamon, and we've become very good friends, and we work together all the time. He's an incredible former Irish tenor turned TV producer, great guy, super talented. And so he said, well, why don't we do a cooking show and put it on Amazon Prime? So we did this cooking show that won a lot of awards, New Day, New Chef. We have about 50 episodes. We just put out another episode with co-starring me, host, and co-host Nina Bergman, who is a big action star. She's been in Doom Annihilation and all sorts of films. And so we got that on Amazon Prime. That was doing gangbusters for quite a while. They kept adding different English-speaking countries that were putting it on. And then one day, after a really good run, it said 99 cents per episode. And that's when it started going down. So then I called Eamon and I said, oh, well, what are we going to do now? And he said,
You didn't get the 99 cents, right? You didn't get the 99 cents? Or any-
no, well, it doesn't really matter. People aren't paying 99 cents. I mean, the point is people watch when it's free. When it's not.
But my point is they were charging, they were pocketing that money themselves and not.
Well, I don't want to say I didn't get involved in the minutia because the amount was so minuscule that it really wasn't worth, getting
Right.
into all of that detail. But what he said to me, he said, well, we can start your own streaming network if you want, in his Irish brogue. I said, let's do it. Let's start a streaming network. Streaming is everything. So that's how we ended up with Unchained TV. And it's on every TV, every Samsung and LG TV. You just use your little clicker and go to, and you can find it. If you have an Amazon Fire Stick, if you have a Roku device, if you have an Amazon Fire Stick, you just put in Unchained TV, one word, there it is, and it comes right up. And it's 2,000 videos, super fun. And like I say, it's life-changing. This is what the mainstream media, look, I work my whole life. I work my butt off. I'd like to be sitting on the beach out there, reading a trashy novel and drinking a virgin pina colada because I'm also 31 years sober. And I'm doing this because I can't enjoy myself while we're destroying the planet and killing animals and making people sick when none of it is necessary. It's all could go away with one simple change. And that is just transitioning to a plant-based diet. It doesn't mean that I'm the vegan police, but if people even reduced their meat consumption to what it was a couple of hundred years ago, when the vast majority of people who were not living on estates and the aristocracy and the kings, they didn't eat this way. And if you look at Mediterranean diets and Asian diets, they were primarily plant-based, and many indigenous diets too. Right now, we have this big brouhaha in LA where they're trying to say that a small group of people are trying to say that rodeos are a celebration of the Mexican culture and you can't stop the roping of calves and the bucking and all this. There's a news conference tomorrow that I'm going to attend and speak at, and I'm going to say it's an insult to me as a Latina to suggest that we have to have cruelty for me to express my culture. That's nonsense. 47% of people in Los Angeles are Latino. That's 1.8 million people. How many of them are riding around in bulls wearing cowboy hats? It's complete cynical political theater. So what we're saying is we can have everything. We can have a celebration of culture. And the other thing I point out is cows are not indigenous to the Americas. The first cow came over on Columbus's second voyage. They are food colonialism, in my opinion. It's not an expression of certainly indigenous culture, which was primarily plant-based. So if you look at Ethiopian culture, we have a great Ethiopian vegan community here in LA with great Ethiopian vegan restaurants. If you look at the Latino culture, if you look at the Asian culture, which invented soy, which invented tofu and plant-based meat alternatives centuries ago, if you look at the Mediterranean diet, all of this was primarily plant-based. So actually, meat and dairy is food colonialism. Additionally, the National Institute of Health itself, the NIH itself says at least 68% of the population experiences lactose malabsorption, which is a fancy way of saying most people are allergic to dairy. And it's primarily people in Northern Europe who are not, like Denmark. Okay, so all these kids are being fed a drink by the USDA that they are allergic to, and then they get sick, and then we have the healthcare costs. So many problems would be solved if we just removed this one completely unnecessary bad habit.
So before
Jane,
we leave Unchained TV, and sorry, Slajna, and then,
no.
then I'll give you the last question because we're almost done here. But it's just
Okay.
back to Unchained TV. So did you have, how is it supported? Yeah, I'm sure it's got costs to run it. So is it just that you have so
Yes.
many viewers now with all of this that it supports itself through
No.
YouTube, or where does
Free.
the
It's
funding come from?
completely 100% free.
Yeah, but it's
We
not
do
free to
not
you.
charge
So
a
how do you
penny.
cover your costs?
Donations. We just
Okay.
did a whole fundraising drive. It's completely free. You can go to your app store and put in Unchained TV, and all of these videos are free. And the great thing is you can text them to people. If you have a friend whose parents have dementia, you could text them how not to die, give them important information. And there's a lot of fun stuff too. So we rely strictly on donations, 100%. Also, we have a lot of volunteers. Virtually everybody who appears on our show as a chef on our network is a volunteer. So we have hundreds of volunteers. I'm a volunteer. Our board members are, except for one person who works at a very reduced rate, doing a lot of technical stuff, volunteers. So we reduce the costs as much as possible. We have very little overhead. I like to say my couch is Unchained TV World Headquarters. We don't have a lot of merch. We have hats because when people become a monthly donor, they get an Unchained TV cap and they're a citizen journalist. And what we enable people to do is to become citizen journalists. I have people all the time come up, I want to get involved. I say, okay, do you want to go live on Facebook? Do you want to go live on TikTok? Do you want to be a chef on one of our cooking shows? Do you want to edit for us? Do you want to shoot video for us? And do you want to be an attorney for us? We have all these people volunteering whatever their skill set. Even a woman who's a violinist, she performed at one of our fundraisers. So we literally have hundreds of volunteers who help make everything happen because they all share the passion of a nonviolent world because they've seen behind the doors. And the thing is, what is happening is so awful behind these closed doors to all these animals. Pigs kept in crates the size of their bodies, never able to turn around. They're smarter than dogs. Not that that should be the only criteria that you use to determine whether or not to torture an animal. I mean, what's happening, and also feminists. Feminists, I always say, hey, feminists, you say rape is rape. None of these animals are making love on these factory farms. They're all artificially inseminated, which is sexual violation. And when you think about it, it's even worse than that. So these are all things that once people see it and it clicks in their head, they can't get it out of their minds. That's why we have hundreds of volunteers, because we're all united in the single goal to stop animal suffering, to save the planet, and to create a nonviolent world.
Thank you, Jane. Thank you so much. I just wanted to ask you really quickly before we close. I heard you say that we don't live in a capitalist society. In fact, you identify as a green libertarian, but we live in a corporate socialist world where corporations are subsidized and are running our government. Can you expound a little bit on that?
Sure, if you go to any veg fest, what you see is mom and pop capitalism. All these people with their little booths selling whatever, kale chips or some kind of dish that they've created, or maybe merch, a t-shirt. That's capitalism. But the meat and dairy industry would collapse if the US government wasn't subsidizing the industry to the tune of many, many, many hundreds of billions of dollars. It is not a capitalist enterprise. The truth is that the meat industry has co-opted government and co-opted media. So that's not capitalism. We have the school lunch program where they're literally saying, if you don't feed these kids dairy milk, you're not going to get funding. Now, there has been some progress in that very recently. Like I say, there's cracks in the system. But the Farm Bill, it has huge subsidies to commodity crops that go to feed farmed animals. Very little subsidy to fruits, vegetables, nuts, grains, and legumes that people actually do eat and should be eating more of. So government has its thumb on the scale. The average burger, meat burger, would cost like at least $30, $40 if it wasn't subsidized by the US government. And then we taxpayers are also being forced to pay for all the health problems that are a result of the bad diet of Americans. 2/3 of Americans overweight or obese because of this bad fast food diet. And the healthcare costs are skyrocketing because of that. And doctors get very little preventative healthcare information. They basically know how to medicate or operate on somebody when they get sick, but they don't know a lot about preventative medicine, which is based around having a whole food, plant-based diet. We are what we eat. So we could reduce taxes. We could, all these things that politicians promise, we could actually deliver if we just changed our relationship with animals.
Well, Jane, it's amazing. You've had an amazing arc of your career, and you've really followed your passions, which is really admirable, and it's worked out great. And so we just appreciate all you've done, and I think you hopefully will be a sort of pathfinder and an example to other people who are looking to go independent and focus on what they want to focus on and create change. So thank you for everything, and thanks for spending the time with us today. It was a great conversation.
Well, I appreciate you having me very much.
Thank you so much.